Okay, so now we are good to go. Good morning, everyone. This is Jonathan Roberts, and this is, I think, our third and fourth in the series at Epiphany Parish on C.S. Lewis during this time of COVID. So we're all home, and I think visiting Narnia is a nice respite and hopefully an adventure. So today, I'm going to try to take what any sane person would spend 2 hours doing and try to pour it into 45 minutes. So we'll see if I succeed in taking disparate ramblings and make them into coherent reflections. So, the gauntlet is tossed and I pick it up. So first I wanted to jump, let me grab my glasses. I always like to start on some reflections on C.S. Lewis and putting the Narnia into a little bit of a context. So I am now following the Dwight rule, holding the book. Jack, this is sort of a foundational biography because it was written by George Sayre, who was about 20 years younger than Lewis, studied under Lewis, and was a good friend of Lewis's. And so it contains, in many ways, some of the most personal reflections of Lewis. In fact, the only airplane ride Lewis had ever gone on was late in his life with Joy Davidman, and they flew to Greece, and they went with George Sayre and his wife. So that just shows you how close they were. And so when Sayre was writing about Lewis and Narnia, he said, and we talked about this in our first session, Lewis, first and foremost, was just trying to write good stories. The most important thing was to tell a good story. And people are drawn to Narnia, not because of the theology or psychology. They're drawn to Narnia because they're really good stories. And then this is what Sayre says about Lewis. The most precious moments to Jack, that's what Lewis was called by his friends, in his ordinary life were those when he did know it, when he was aware of the spiritual quality of material things, of the infusion of the supernatural into the workaday world. His success in translating these moments into his fairy stories gives the series a haunting appeal. Simultaneously, it gives its readers, quote, a taste of the other. And that, of course, is what he picked up from the work of George MacDonald, a taste of the other. And Sayre later writes, the Narnia stories reveal more about Jack's personal religion than any of his theological books, because he wrote them more from the heart than from the head. So these are books written from the heart. They're wonderful tales, they're wonderful stories. So today we are talking about Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And this is the third, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, in the order in which Lewis wrote them. And he wrote this very quickly. He wrote this in about 2 months. He produced basically a book a year through the full series of 7. But when he got in the mode of writing, he was able to do it very, very quickly. Again, in sort of marked contrast to Tolkien. And when we think about this, the Dawn Treader has a motif a little bit similar to the Odyssey. So it is a journey with many adventures, lots of activity. And I think what distinguishes this book is how much character development there is between so many characters. If you go to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that's really the story of Edmund and his fall and his retrieval by Aslan. A little bit about Lucy, but the character doesn't really. All the other characters don't substantially develop other than Edmund. Caspian, of course, had the dwarfs that evolved and advanced, as did Caspian, and the kids played off each other a little bit. and learn to trust Lucy a little bit more and Aslan a little bit more. But this story really has substantial character development on the part of Eustace, Lucy, Edmund, Caspian, Reepicheep, Bairn. And so one thing I thought would be fun, and we'll see how this works. Those of you that know me know that I like my yellow stickies. You should all be a little terrified about how many I have here, because I got a lot of yellow stickies here. But what I thought I would do, since we're all familiar with the story, because you've all dutifully read the book, it's a great story if you haven't, is go through each character and sort of track their character development. Because Eustace is there not by choice, and he finds himself going through a transformation. Lucy is there for adventure. Edmund is there and showing his full mastery. Caspian is there because he's a king and he's doing something out of obligation and honor. Reepicheep is really the only one that is on a quest in the purest sense. And then we meet other people. And what you're seeing is not only everybody's on their own journey, but everybody is operating within their own kingdom framework. Dhih, one of the key themes of Dhih is this notion of kingdom, that we operate within the kingdom of God, or that we all have our own kingdom and we make various things the center of that kingdom: family, wealth, status, whatever the case may be. And Dallas Willard, a great theologian, has said that we're all comfortable using the word kingdom, but we're uncomfortable with the notion that there's a king. And so Narnia is really about the notion of the Narnian kingdom with Aslan as the king. And what we're seeing through this story is how various people and lands have different notions of the kingdom. So let's start with really the character, the main character of this book, Eustace. And in one of the great all-time Lewis's lines, he begins the book, "There was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it." That tells you everything about Eustace. And we know that he's a real stinker, and that he's a bully, and that he's taunting poor Lucy and Edmund that are stuck at his house, and that his parents are very forward thinking, and that he is essentially all the things that Lewis most dislikes. And so that is Eustace. And so when we go, they go off to sea, Eustace, they get sucked into Narnia, and they leave a civilized country, and Eustace is very difficult throughout. So he's complaining, "In a civilized country where I came from," said Eustace, "ships are so big that when you're inside, you wouldn't know you were at sea at all." So, Eustace is all about status and material possession. In fact, a while ago, I wrote an entire essay on the diminishing return of wealth, that at the end of the day, wealth, if you assume that the main value in life is the quality of your relationships, which is statistically proven to be true, wealth at a point in time removes you from relationship. And so it's kind of interesting that, his notion of being at sea is to be on a ship that you don't even know you're at sea. You're entirely removed from the experience. And that, I think, characterizes Eustace as a whole, entirely removed from the experience of life and adventure. So Eustace continues to be a stinker. He battles with Reepicheep. He's swatted in the behind by Reepicheep. We'll talk a little bit about Reepicheep. And then they find themselves to this island, and they're trying to reprovision and fix things like their mast that broke in a storm, etc. And Eustace sneaks off because he's being selfish, and he's thinking all bad things about, how his cousins are going to leave him. And he finds and discovers a dragon, and he's very terrified by it. And he basically sees the dragon die. And And so he crawls into the dragon cave. And then, of course, in one of the great scenes, he goes back out to get a drink in the morning and sees one arm move and another arm move. And he realizes he's surrounded by a dragon. And then, of course, he realizes that he himself was the dragon. And he didn't understand how this had happened because he only read the wrong books. And he thought initially, wow, I'm a dragon. I can do whatever I want. I can take whatever I want. And then he realizes, of course, that he is very isolated and that he is alone. And so first we have the notion of how he became a dragon. And so here I am. I'm going to do a little reading. He had turned into a dragon while he was asleep, sleeping on a dragon's hoard with greedy dragonish thoughts in his heart. He had become a dragon himself. Now, warning, I'm going to do 3 scripture readings. I'm not going to beat you over the head with it, but I am going to go to Proverbs 23, verse 7. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. That is what happened to Eustace. He had become what was in his heart. He had become a dragon. So we then proceed to Eustace helping everybody out. Eustace realizing as a dragon that he hadn't been such a good guy. Eustace realizing that he was a, quote, monster cut off from the whole human race. And then, of course, Lucy and Reepicheep, the first to discover that it was really Eustace, and seeing him, Lucy seeing him cry, Lucy always the most perceptive. Reepicheep, of course, taking care of him, and everybody realizing that Eustace's character had been rather improved by becoming a dragon. He was anxious to help. And so, and that he liked the pleasure of being liked and liking other people. So Eustace actually becomes a much better person as a dragon than he was as a person. And then we come to one of the key scenes in, frankly, all of Narnia, maybe one of the top 5 vignettes. I could go through them all, but that would take longer. And that is the de-dragoning of Eustace. So Eustace is walking the shore. He sees Edmund, who had been out, and Eustace tells the story of how a huge lion had come towards him and had talked to him. And the lion had told him that he must undress first, and that means take off of his scales. And Eustace scrapes away his scales. And so he started to tear his scales off. And the dragon had said that he had to stand back. You will have to let me undress you. I was afraid of his claws. That's Eustace speaking, I can tell you. But I was pretty nearly desperate now. So I just lay flat down on my back and let him do it. The very first tear he made was so deep that I thought it had gone right into my heart. And when he began pulling the skin off, it hurt worse than anything I've ever felt. The only thing that made me able to bear it was just the pleasure of feeling the stuff peel off. You know, if you've ever picked the scab of a sore place, it hurts like a bulio, but it's such fun to see it coming away. I know exactly what you mean, said Edmund. Isn't that beautiful? And then a statement about Edmund, just before we leave this page. Edmund says, I think you've seen Aslan, said Edmund. And then Eustace says, I'd like to apologize. I'm afraid I've been pretty beastly. And this is speaking to Edmund's character. That's all right, said Edmund. Between ourselves, you haven't been as bad as I was on my first trip to Narnia. You were only an ass, but I was a traitor. So that is just this incredible scene of the de-dragoning of Eustace. And I want to pause briefly for a psychological reflection. I'm going to go to another book, and I think I'm on pretty safe ground to say that this book has never been referenced during a discussion of Narnia, which is either insightful or entirely random. You choose. So here is the book, The Soul's Code by James Hillman, a bestseller in the 1990s. And it talks about the inner spirit, the inner daemon. And what Eustace is discovering is his true self. And the psychological process, I think, can be described as what he can do to tear off the scale, what he can do to realize the influences that are impacting him, and the retrieval of early childhood memories and all this other kind of stuff. And that's an important thing. You need to tear off a lot of your own scales. But then when Aslan tears and frees him, he's allowing him to be fully himself. And so this book is about that other part of it. This book is about nature and nurture, those two influences on our lives, but it's also about our inner daemon, our spirit, our calling, that thing that is distinctly us. And a few quotes from the beginning of the book. In the final analysis, we count for something only because of the essential we embody. And if we do not embody that, life is wasted. C.G. Jung. One always learns one's mystery at the price of one's innocence. Robertson Davies, Fifth Business. Because they have so little, children must rely on imagination rather than experience. Eleanor Roosevelt. Even before reason, there is the inward movement which reaches out towards its own. Plotinus. On and on and on. So I'll leave, the first chapter is the Acorn Theory, and this is how the book starts. There is more in a human life than our theories of it allow. Sooner or later, something seems to call us onto a particular path. You may remember this something as a signal, moment in childhood, when an urge out of nowhere, a fascination, a peculiar turn of events struck us as annunciation. This is what I must do. This is what I have to have. This is who I am. This book is about that call. This book is, I would argue that this book is about that call. This book is about finding that, and this book is about how Aslan allows it. One other reflection I had, this too has never been referenced in a Lewis reference, a quote from Bertrand Russell. So one thing that Lewis did was he always ran the alternative. If you believe one thing, what's the opposite of believing that, right? What happens in the absence of believing in this inner calling? What happens in the absence of believing that there is a king within the kingdom? How do you characterize that absence? This is another biography of Lewis. This is, see if you can read that title. I think I must have read this in the bathtub and I lost the cover. This is a recent biography, A Life by McGrath. And this is Bertrand Russell, easily one of the most articulate and influential British atheist writers of the 20th century. A quote from Bertrand Russell: "The center of me is always and eternally a terrible pain, a searching for something beyond what the world contains, something transfigured and infinite, the beatific vision, God. I do not find it. I do not think it is to be found, but the love of it is my life. It is the actual spring of life within me." That's what happens in the absence of belief. You yearn for it, but you don't believe, and it's a terrible hole. As Pascal would say, a God-shaped hole. So now back to Narnia. Sorry for that digression. We continue to move with Eustace, and we know that after he had been de-dragoned, Eustace laughed, a different laugh from any Edmund had heard him give before. That is a sign that Eustace had been transformed. And it is, such incredible change in Eustace that we see throughout the book, just as we saw with Edmund. And I had a couple of, oh, here we go. Just on transformation. I mean, as Christians, this is actually kind of a big deal. That you would argue that is in many ways the point. So 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things become new. Acts 9:18 about St. Paul. Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up, and he was baptized. And then the last reference, if I can get it, it's a little longer, so I had to, I didn't write it down. Psalms 51, 5 through 12. We've all read this. I'll just do a brief. Cleanse me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. So there's all these themes throughout the Bible of transformation, and Lewis captures it so wonderfully in the de-dragoning of Eustace. So a few more points on Eustace. Eustace then becomes a much better guy. He slips occasionally. That's the honesty of Lewis. There's a little old Eustace that appears just as there's old Edmund that appears. And we go, I think that's all my Eustace reference. He just basically becomes a good guy. So, Eustace. Then we have Reepicheep. I'm going to tick on him real quick. See, I've been going 20 minutes, so I only want to go for another 10 and then do questions. Reepicheep had heard from someone that took care of him and used to sing rhymes to him when he was a little mouse. The dryad spoke this verse over to me. Where sky and water meet, where the waves grow sweet, doubt not, Reepicheep, to find all you seek. This is the utter east. So that's Reepicheep going off to the island. And Reepicheep is pure a soul as you could have, right? He defends Lucy's honor with the monopods. He chastises Eustace, but then becomes Eustace's best friend. He is true and true. He is a true knight. Not perfect. In the last book, Aslan chastised him a little bit for pride, but he is sort of the one of the best characters. In fact, Reepicheep was one of C.S. Lewis's two favorite characters, Reepicheep and Puddleglum, who we'll meet next week. And so towards the end, he basically says going to the end is his heart's desire. And then he remembers the old prophecy, right? Remember, Lewis referred to Christianity. What persuaded Lewis was the fact that he believed that it was true myth. So it's fabulous the way Lewis weaves myth in. Where the waves grow sweet, doubt not, Reepicheep, in the utter east. And then Reepicheep leaves us and goes into Aslan's land. So this is a wonderful adventure of Reepicheep. I would say, we should really talk about Lucy. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Aslan, and then I'll pause. I'll skip Edmund okay, I'm going to skip Edmund and Caspian. That's for the longer form. We'll wait for the next pandemic. So Lucy, of course, is just fabulous. She's true. She sees Aslan first. She's calm. She, helps settle issues throughout the book. But the great moment for Lucy, and what I think Lewis does so well, is shows that she's not perfect, that Lucy also has pride. She had been very, Susan in the books is the beautiful older sister. Susan gets all the attention. Lucy, as we know, is the youngest and often, disregarded, not believed, undoubtedly felt a lot of jealousy towards her sister. And so she's in the magician's house. She's gone to the great book to try to free the monopods from the spell that made them invisible. And she's looking through the book, and she does two things. The first thing is she sees a spell, an infallible spell to make beautiful her that uttereth beyond the lot of mortals. So Lucy sees a chance to be more beautiful than Susan. And she is going to take that chance. And she was just about to get that spell and read that spell. And then she found the great face of the lion Aslan himself, staring into hers. It was painted such a bright gold that it seemed to be coming towards her out of the page. And indeed, she was never quite sure afterwards that it hadn't really moved a little. And at any rate, she knew the expression on his face quite well. He was growling, and you could see most of his teeth. She became horribly afraid and turned the page over. I mean, isn't that great? Aslan coming out of the page. And just think about all the ways that we've seen Aslan in this story. We see Aslan up on the hill when they're all fighting over the potential of a golden pond. If that would be the vignette I would talk about, Edmund and Caspian, right? They were both overcome with greed and with their own sense of power, and they were starting to fight, and Lucy couldn't quite bring him back in. And then they saw a glimpse of Aslan, and they snapped out of it, and they realized that they were dealing with bad magic, and they had to leave the island. They saw a glimpse of Aslan. Lucy prayed when they were stuck in the dark in the land where dreams became true, and they were in dismay, and Lucy says a little prayer, and then an albatross comes, and initially it looks like a cross. Interesting, right? And then flies away. Lucy hears Aslan's voice, right? So it is not just sight, it is awful, it is also sound. Let me go to that section real quick. Then they go, they hear the sound more exciting. It's a great, at the end of the world, right? Beginning to the end of the world, with the table being reset, with the image of the knife that the witch had used in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to kill him. I mean, if you ever want to see a great vignette about the Eucharist, it's chapter 14, beginning of the end of the world, and another view of Aslan. And then, of course, finishing on Aslan. But there you shall meet me, dear one. This is at the end of the book, said Aslan. Are you sure? There too, sir, said Edmund. I am, said Aslan, but there I have another name. You must learn to know me by that name. And of course, when they had come ashore at the end of the world, Reepicheep takes off and goes up, further up, which we see in the last battle. But the kids also come, and they are met by a lamb. Come and have breakfast, said the lamb in its sweet, milky voice. And then the lamb transforms into Aslan. And then the kids realize that they can't return to Narnia again. You are too old, children, said Aslan, and you must begin to come close to your own world now. It isn't Narnia, sobbed Lucy. It's you. We shan't meet you there. How can we live, never meeting you? But you shall, dear one, said Aslan. Are you there too, sir? Said Edmund. I am, said Aslan, but there I have another name. You must learn to know me by that name. So, you will note that I just really have a lot of stickies to go through, but I'm not going to do it because I've been going straight for a half hour, and I've even thrown some Bible verses in there, which is really quite a lot, and a little bit of Jung, a little bit of Bertrand Russell. We've kind of been all over the surface area and beyond of Narnia. So I'm going to stop and hope that we've had a question or two come in.
Yeah, unfortunately, nobody can hear me, so you're going to repeat the question.
Okay.
So,
okay. Gar's telling me the questions.
In C.S. Lewis's time, it was more common to make boys the main character in epics. Why do you think he chose a girl, Lucy?
So the question is, in Lewis's time, it was more common to make boys the hero than girls. Why did he choose Lucy? Well, Lucy was his goddaughter and the daughter of Owen Barfield, who he was very, very fond of. Lewis called Barfield his second friend, his one who reads all the right books and draws all the wrong conclusions. Arthur Greaves was his first friend, and they were completely simpatico on their love of myth from the moment they met as young teenagers. And so there's no doubt that it was through his love of Owen Barfield and his love of his goddaughter that he made Lucy sort of the key character and far and away the purest of heart. So yeah, I think that's got to be it.
Okay, so I don't think this is not, I think, surprised by joy, but the search for joy is consistent in Lewis' works. How does this sum up Reepicheep's aspirations in Voyage of the Dawn Treader?
So the question is, Lewis has a search for love or search for joy, and how does that relate to Reepicheep? You know, I don't know. That's a very good question. I don't know if I have a declarative answer to it. I mean, Reepicheep, you know, if you were to go back to my James Hillman reference, Reepicheep had this incredible sense of a calling. Reepicheep was always enchanted by the notion of getting to Aslan's land. And joy is just the image of that, right? Joy is a reflection of that eternal relationship. So in Lewis, if we were to go to the four loves, I would say joy is a glimpse of agape love. And G.K. Chesterton had referred to like nature, when you see Mount Rainier, those of us in Seattle, and your heart leaps a little bit, as ours, as Elizabeth's and mine, and does almost every morning when we're walking our dog at 6 a.m. That what we're being drawn to is the reflected beauty of agape love. That would be a Lewis construct. And so that is what is drawing Reepicheep forward, is that reflected beauty, that notion of something beyond. So I think I've talked myself into believing that he's motivated almost entirely by joy, by the glimpse of what is beyond. Garber?
Okay, another Lucy question. When Lucy says to Aslan, "It isn't Narnia, you know, it's you," what is she saying in a Christian context?
So the question is, when at the end, the thing I just read, when Lucy says, "It isn't Narnia, you know, it's you," what is she saying in the Christian context? Well, keep in mind, Lewis wrote this book to, quote, baptize the imagination of children so that they would be familiar with the motifs and the constructs of a king within the kingdom, Aslan. And a lot of the times, you know, what's so interesting about the Narnia books is how seldom Aslan often is there. You know, he was there a fair amount in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but you know, he didn't appear in this book. He wasn't even mentioned till like 60 pages in. He was the king within the kingdom. And that is a structure that Lewis is trying to baptize in children's imagination. So, I mean, you couldn't be any clearer, right? The albatross also took the form of a cross. And then when they come ashore into their own land, it's the Lamb, of course, the Lamb of Christ. So, you know, just like what Lewis said in that Letters to Children that I first read, you know, you can't love Aslan more than Christ. That was the child had written, the mother had written Lewis that his child was worried that he was loving Aslan more, because they represent the same thing. Aslan is simply a reflection of what Christ would be if he went to the land of Narnia. And so it is Lewis's interpretation of what a Christ figure would be in this mythical land. Yep.
Cool. Of the 7 missing lords, or I guess the 7 missing lords, why did so many meet with unpleasant fates?
Of the 7 missing lords, why did so many meet with so many unpleasant fates? You know, I don't know if I know that answer. I mean, I would say that the one that didn't, Baron, he was drawn to relationship. I mean, he wasn't on a quest for quest's sake. He fell in love. And the thing that's so interesting about him is he made relationship primary, And he stayed, but yet he essentially was a Christian in a heathen land, right? Slavery was prevalent. It was a, quote, slovenly place. It lacked any sort of moral structure, and he was moral in an immoral place. If I could be, I mean, okay, this is where I'm going to not necessarily be Christian. It's like being a Christian in California. I'm sorry, all of you. If anybody's dialing in from California, but
The board is lighting up.
but the board is lighting up. There we have lots of questions, a lot of inbound. But and we should all remember that Dwight actually came from California, so it's not all bad. But he and I think everybody else was just kept being pushed on and not even really clear why they were going. I mean, Reepicheep knew why he was going. He was on a pure quest. The other lords were simply leaving because they could not be in the land of Miraz. They probably would have been killed because he was a threat to his power. Okay.
Cool. This one's kind of fun. The Duffel-Puds.
Yes.
Any connection to Tolkien here?
The Duffel-Puds, any connection to Tolkien? Yeah, strange images. I don't have a direct Tolkien reference, but I will make a Tolkien reference that I thought about in reading this book. You know, The Lord of the Rings, we all watch the movies, and if you're like me, you've watched the movies, more times than you choose to admit. The Lord of the Rings ends with the Battle of Hobbiton. The Lord of the Rings ends with Saruman. He gets out of the two towers. He leaves. He's pushed out of the two towers by Treebeard and is allowed to escape. And he then goes and basically occupies where the hobbits came from. And so when they return after these incredible adventures, they have their own battle to save their own land. And it's a deeply personal battle for all of the hobbits. And that's just such a beautiful way to end the book. And gosh, I got my Elise is calling me. That's such a fabulous way to end the book. And I think that it's these great adventures that on the one hand are great sagas and adventures, and on the other hand are very personal struggles. And so in that sense, I would say Lewis's journey and The Lord of the Rings have a really common tie. That's not a direct answer to your question, but it is a response.
Cool. Okay, I get this right. So, in quotes, utter east. Is it mythical or is it real in Narnia? And what did Lewis want to say using this term?
Utter east, is it real or is it mythical in Narnia? Well, I mean, I think that's kind of the same thing, right? Narnia is a myth. So it is real in Narnia, and it is part of the myth of Narnia. And so I think that, but I think what is true is Lewis had a very clear view that heaven is real. I think it was important in Narnia, and we see this in a couple of the other books, this dividing line between Narnia and Earth, or Earth, right the in-between place. We saw that. We'll see it later on in The Magician's Nephew, The World Between Worlds, and then the ability to go one place or the other. Lewis felt very strongly that heaven was real. It was tangible. And there would be another era of our existence, that we have an eternal soul. And so within the mythology of Narnia, it's very important that there's an utter east. It's very important that what's beyond this world is tangible, and in many ways more real than what we have today. In Mere Christianity, he uses the reference of Plato's cave. So as you may recall, I mean, I'm sure you have all been reading your Plato lately. When you're in the cave, if all you did was live in the cave and see images on the wall, shadows on the wall, that would be your reality. That would be all that you know. But when you leave the cave, then of course that's the real reality. So the book or the movie called Shadowlands, based on Linton Lands, written by David Gresham, actually had it, or Douglas Gresham actually had it wrong. it suggested that Lewis felt that he was living within the Shadowlands and that it was despair. That's exactly the opposite of the way Lewis thought about it. He thought that the reality that we're living in now is the Shadowlands, and that the true reality is outside of the cave. So in the Narnia mythology, in the last battle, the true Narnia, that's what he calls it, is what happens after the old Narnia goes away and the Narnia of heaven is created. So that's a long answer to a short question, but it's very, very important in the Lewis construct that there be a Narnia beyond the Narnia that we read about.
All right, last one. It's another Christian term. The Magician's Book is a temptation for Lucy. What is this reflecting in Christian terms or modern time terms?
So the Magician's Book was a temptation for Lucy. What does this mean in Christian terms in modern times? Well, keep in mind, there were two temptations in the book, right? The one temptation was to be more beautiful than Susan. And as you recall from that reading, she got glimpses of what would happen, which would be she would have been terribly unhappy. She would have become the object of desire of all the kings and kingdoms around. There would have been mass battles and destruction, and it would have actually ended up being a completely awful idea. And she was relieved when she had glimpses of what would have been that she hadn't done it, right? A little bit similar to what if Diggory had taken the fruit and not been given the fruit back to his mother in The Magician's Nephew, right? Images of that. And so I think that it's really a statement of context, right? We think we know something and we think we know what's best for us and we want it. But in fact, if we were to get it, it might not be what we had thought it would be. And so I think that is directly applicable to our lives, right? The college that, boy, if I'd only gotten into that college, my whole life would have been great. Well, you honestly don't know that. You play the hand you got, and it's probably going to be just fine if you are operating within the kingdom construct. We can't force things. The other thing, Lucy also basically eavesdropped on her friends, and there was a good friend of hers who she thought was a good friend who was talking negatively about her riding in a train car back in Earth, and Lucy was very, very hurt, and she had to carry that hurt with her when she returned. And Aslan said, well, I can't take your knowledge of that away, but you have to understand the broader context of what was happening with this child and that she was being bullied, and you have to be appreciative of someone else's story, which I think is also a great Christian lesson, that we can't take ourselves so seriously and be a little bit more respectful and thoughtful about other people. So the whole book is infused with essentially Christian understanding. And I think I answered that. I spoke to this in an earlier talk, but Lewis writes within a Christian construct. Author of Harry Potter wrote that within a Christian construct. Obviously, Tolkien writes that within a Christian construct. What ultimately drew Lewis to Christianity was the fact that all of the authors that he most enjoyed, that seemed to speak to the greatest truth about how life worked, good, evil, transformation, struggle, overcoming, journey, all these themes were evident in Christian writers and not evident in atheists or non-Christian writers, or at the very least, people that didn't believe in something beyond themselves. Lewis was very ecumenical, so he would have said the same about, firmly dedicated Muslim writers or Jewish writers. And so, I think this book is infused with that, as are all these other books. And that is what makes them good books, what makes them true, what allows them to resonate with each of us. Is that it, Gar?
That's it.
And I'm noting largely because I didn't cover all these stickies, that we are hitting it exactly in 45 minutes. And next week, we go to the Silver Chair. And that book, as I mentioned earlier, has Puddleglum, which after Reepicheep is one of Lewis's favorite characters in all of Narnia. It is a fabulously good book. I really encourage you to read it this week, The Silver Chair, and I'll see if I can make even more random observations with psychologists and atheists and whatever else may come to mind. But I want to wish you a good week, wish you good health, and thank you for spending a little time in Narnia with me today. Thank you.